All right, today on Off Topic Tuesdays, we're taking a look at a faction that I think would be perfectly suited to me, but I just cannot bring myself to love. And I think a lot of other players are in the exact same boat. I'm speaking, of course, about the Wood Elves. So kick back, grab a drink, and let's get into it.
Wow.
All right, so this might sound a bit harsh, but I think literally every single facet of the Wood Elf experience needs work. Um, let's kind of break it down into four things.
We
There's
must
the
preserve
biggest
this
elephant in the room,
world.
the one that everyone knows, which is Amber. Sort of taking a step back from there and looking a bit high scale, I would say their overall campaign mechanics need a bit of tweaking. Their unit roster could definitely use some additions or changes at the bare minimum, and the lack of their legendary lords. So, of course, we'll take a look at Amber to start with. I think most people would agree that Amber as a limiting technology to their unit roster is it's not a fun experience, right? It sucks having half your roster available, but having to make a huge decision between advancing yourself on a global scale or getting a roster or two of units that you really, really need. It totally punishes them in a way that literally no other faction has to deal with. They could remove that aspect completely and just give increased upkeep like what, plenty of other factions already have. To me, what I would do with Amber is limit it basically only to Regents of Renown, the Tech Tree, and the Oak of Ages. In that way, the Amber becomes a bit more of a special consideration. Are you going to pay to have this particular Regiment of Renown, or are you going to save it up for this tech element, or are you really, really going to save it up and try to get the Oak of Ages going? That would be a bit more of a fun experience to me, and then, of course, you have access to all the units that you really want to play with. Amber, however, is not unique as being the only problem that they have, especially from a campaign perspective. I think most people agree that the Wood Elves are in this weird situation right now where they have to massively expand. They're actually one of the most aggressive factions to play as because you're constantly pushing out your borders. And I don't find it particularly A, lore appropriate, but also B, fun, right? It makes them play very similar to everyone else. My own personal recommendation would be to have like an element that slows down their expansion and doesn't necessarily reward you from just pushing out like crazy. So to me, what I would have is anytime that you've conquered an enemy territory, you have the option to plant a seedling, and that seedling would lower your growth in any other territory by, I don't know, pick some number, 20 growth or whatever. And this would all be compounding. So if you really try to push out and hit like 3 or 4 territories all at once, well, you are going to have absolutely no growth for your empire while you do this. You could even put in something like a happiness penalty or something while you do it. And I would also make the Wood Elves unique in that they have to have a friendly border to the territory that they're conquering. I think it would be kind of a neat little thing to rein them back in. And then, of course, at the end of your 5 turns or 10 turns or however they want to set it up for the seedling, it would develop into an outpost or even a full city. It frankly doesn't matter to me. The other thing I would do is maybe allow them to expand out that Athaloran corruption further out because, as the Wood Elves, it's kind of frustrating because you have all these super weak outposts all around your territories, but you don't really have any means of defending them. You're not like a normal faction where you can just increase the garrisons or people have to worry about whittling down your walls or something like that. If you have a territory outside there as the Wood Elves and someone shows up to kick in its front doors, you're pretty much going to lose that territory 9 times out of 10. So to me, giving them a sort of a slow but compounding method of getting outside their borders, I think would be kind of fun, right? Each time you conquered a territory, it'd be a really tactical decision, but it would allow you to sort of hold on to it after you have pushed through and earned that territory. So if those two then are the sort of big scale elements that need to be changed, let's bring it down to the battle scale side of things that need to be changed. Um, their unit roster, I know some players probably don't mind them and stuff. Myself, I find it kind of frustrating that what's supposed to be the premier ranged faction in the game is handily outranged by several other factions. Damage output, they're handily outperformed by several factions. The Wood Elves are supposed to be these kind of ranged glass cannons, and frankly, they just do not meet that status. the Skaven will kick the crap out of them at range. The High Elves and Dark Elves will kick the crap out of them at range. You know, they've definitely lost the battle to power creep considerably compared to other factions. Heck, even the Empire these days, I would say, is probably about on par with the Wood Elves for range damage. They definitely need a good boost there. Now, whether that's through new units or more likely through tweaking all of their existing unit roster to give them better ranged options, however it's done, it needs to be done because at the moment, they might be competitive, but they're not lore accurate. You know what I mean? Um, that's one of the two big issues they have in battle. The other one I would say, and the one that everyone's asking for, is their lack of legendary lords, right? Barring mods, you have essentially just two legendary lords. You've got a guy who's good with elves, you got a guy who's good with tree men. Um, there's not really a whole hell of a lot of variety there that makes things fun. I mean, they have the singular lowest legendary lord count of any faction in the game. Even the beastmen have more, and frankly, even the beastmen need more. Um, at the bare minimum, they need another legendary lord. Now, I've heard plenty of theories about who that should be, and we'll touch on those in a second. But like I said, at the minimum, they need a legendary lord. I'd say it's probably more reasonable. They actually need two legendary lords. The way I would see doing this is the same way that we had the free LC updates alongside the DLC updates with these last two cross-game packages. But rather than giving another Game 2 faction a legendary lord, I would have the free LC be a legendary lord for the Wood Elves and the DLC have a legendary lord for the Wood Elves. Now, for the legendary lords they could add, I think the Wood Elves are in this really cool position where almost all of their best stuff is still sitting in the wings, ready to go. I mean, you've still got Ariel, you've still got Daith, you've still got the Sisters of Twilight, you've still got Drycha, however the hell you pronounce her name, Wood Lady. You've got a ton of really good options that haven't been touched upon yet. I think most of us, myself included, would probably expect that Ariel's, got the most likely odds of showing up. She fits in a niche that currently the Wood Elves completely lack, which is a caster legendary lord. We've got Orion as a ranged one, and we've got Durthu as a tank, but we don't have anyone at the moment who's a spellcaster. She would slot in really well with that. On top of that, her lore also slots in perfectly with almost everything else that's in the game, right? She has lore that pertains to Nagaroth. She has lore that pertains, of course, to Orion. She has lore that is very well linked up to the Oak of Ages. She's a very common sense pick. I mean, she would theoretically be slightly overpowered if we're going by the lore, but I mean, whatever. We can always play around with the values. It's not the end of the world there. We've got Croak in the game, and he's also pretty gratuitous if we're going by the lore, right? I think Ariel's probably the number one most likely pick if we're going by common sense here. Alright, so one person that a lot of people ask for is Drycha, Crazy Tree Lady. She has some things going for her. A, there's quite a bit of lore about her. B, she would be a non-elf character in a roster that's almost entirely elves. And C, she already has her battle mechanics and all that kind of stuff already done. She is a playable character on the tabletop. I'm not personally crazy about her. She kind of just acts and feels like Durthu turned to 11. So like Durthu, she's a forest spirit, a bit of a different model in this one. She kind of looks more like a fae trapped within a tree rather than just a tree himself. But that aspect's going to be very the same. She's hates elves just like Durthu, so that aspect's just the same. She doesn't really add anything to the game. She is a very weak caster. She could use that, I guess, to differentiate herself, but again, I'm not super stoked on her, and frankly, even her interesting model, I mean, frankly, that comes from Age of Sigmar more so than the actual Warhammer Fantasy tabletop. So it's kind of a double-edged sword with her. I won't be upset if she shows up, but she's not the one I'm hoping for. Alright, so the next one on the list is my own personal favorite out of everything on this list, although it's also the only one that CA has out and out said will not come in the game. But that was quite some time ago, and things have changed pretty dramatically since they made that statement. So the next on the list is the Sisters of Twilight. They're two sisters, I guess, that perform two very different roles. One's the dedicated melee combatant, the other one's the dedicated range combatant. And they have this cool mechanic where if one of them falls in combat, so long as the other one's alive, the one that fell will eventually come back good as new. So that could be like a really cool regeneration mechanic or something, as long as the other one's alive, I guess. Or I'm not sure how they would run it. They could also do, I guess, a summonable ability on cooldown, sort of like what Krell is for Heinrich Himmler, except for rather than being a one-time use, you would just have it, like I said, on cooldown. So if one was alive, you could summon in the other one before that first one fell. CA in the past said that they would be able to put them in because of how difficult it is to do two separate models that are doing two separate things. But since they've made that statement, Skarsnik has shown up without issue. We have other players or other lords that have been put in with the similar mechanics, such as Vlad and Isabella, or Heinrich Himmler and Krell. So there's a lot of ways to get around what CA said's an impossible task. So there are three kind of weaker options in my eyes, but they could still work. One is Erloth, Naeth would be a second option, and Dieth would be a third option. Erloth is... he's not very interesting from a gameplay perspective to me. He would just be another melee legendary lord. I guess he'd be unique in the Wood Elf roster in that he'd be an actual Wood Elf melee character as opposed to a Tree Man melee character. But yeah, in terms of actual gameplay, he probably wouldn't be all that interesting, and he would also require a bit of lore, yeah, changes in order to make sense with the current layout of the map. Basically, his deal is that he was a big coward right up until he met Ariel. She made him his champion, and then he suddenly turned into this super brave guy that was always fighting for Ariel. I could maybe see him showing up as a hero option for Ariel, with Ariel being the legendary lord option, but for him to be a legendary lord doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So these next two are pretty minor characters. In fact, one of them is so minor they don't even have a tabletop model. But I actually think that they have pretty realistic chances of showing up. In fact, both of them do show up in Mixu's Legendary Lords mod. And we'll get into why for each of them. First of these two is Naeth. When I actually first started this video, I was super opposed to the concept of adding in Naeth as a Legendary Lord. She's fairly minor character. She is a weaker caster than Ariel. A lot less people know her than Ariel. Her mechanics I thought wouldn't be very fun, but I've done a complete 180 on her. I mean, first and foremost, her original artwork from Games Workshop is just, it's from back in the era when stuff from CA looked hilariously bad. But man, I saw some of the fan art of her, and I think that there's a really cool possibility to make her interesting. Two is also her mechanics. Now, Mixu only touches on one of the two of them, but we'll touch on that one first, I guess. And that is that she is the one responsible for the corruption mechanic that you see in Athel Loren in the base game. That's because of how she essentially weaponizes the forest. Now in Mixu's mod, they do it through sort of a geomantic web system. I think CA could do even more interesting things with it. It would be fun to see. But that could actually be alright. Her second thing, and the one I think is less likely to show up, is she practices divination, so she predicts the future and plans accordingly and all that kind of stuff. It sounds kind of fun on paper, but when you actually think about it in practical implementation, it wouldn't be very fun to have all of your choices kind of dictated to you already. So I think that aspect of things will be probably scrapped, but I'd be super open to seeing her make an actual CA official appearance in the game. Which leaves us to conclude with Dieth. I actually hope that he is strongly considered as one of the options. He's not technically a lord or a hero going by the actual books, but he's such a unique character that he's extremely well known, and it wouldn't be any struggle to put him in at all. Technically speaking, he is supposed to be in Targovan, which would put him as yet another Wood Elf legendary lord in Athel Loren. But in his particular case, because he is this crazy good blacksmith, it wouldn't be outside of the realm of reality to actually toss him to like an Anvil of Vol or something, in the New World map, which would be kind of a cool thing for him, right? A, you'd get him into the New World, and B, you would have him away from Athel Loren, which would be nice to see. Like I said, with him being a master blacksmith too, it also opens itself up to some pretty unique gameplay options. You could kind of steal the unique building mechanic of the dwarves, which is exactly how Mixu uses him in his own mod. But in general, I feel like he has a lot of potential. I'd put him up there with the big three as being a good option to have in our back pockets. But yeah, I mean, as you can see, we're quite a ways into this video now. The Wood Elves, more so than literally any other race in the entire game, they need the most work. Like, they almost need a DLC just to themselves to get them up to the standards of the Game 2 races, and I'm not sure if we're going to see that, unfortunately. It's really disappointing to me because the Wood Elves, like I said, have the potential to be one of my favorite kind of races. I love using ranged races, but they're not there. Even if they can do some of these fixes piecemeal, toss in a legendary lord, and then later on toss in a couple unit fixes, and then later on they can focus on the campaign fixes. Maybe they can go that route, but we have a lot of work to do on the Wood Elves to get them up and running. On the next Off Topic Tuesdays, I don't actually have any ideas yet, so if you've got any of your own, leave them down in the comments and we'll maybe go that route. And if not, I'll try to think of something that we'll talk about next week. Thanks for watching, and see ya.